Now, I have the honor of asking the chairman of the Guyana Reparations Committee, Chief Eric Phillips, who you all know, to come and do a presentation for us on the Holocaust and African Guyanese in one Guyana. Well, the one is inverted commas, so you know what that means. So let's give him a round of applause.
Jambo, before I begin, I'd like to remind Bug that I'm not 77. We were born on the same day, which is the 19th of October. Brother Irvin, our spiritual leader, His Excellency Hamilton Green, Mistress of Ceremonies, Elders, Deputy Mayor of Georgetown, members of African organizations, members of the APNU, Bayete and Jambo.
Bayete. Jambo.
This year we commemorate the 200th anniversary of the bicentenary of the Demerara Slave Rebellion, in which approximately 10 to 12,000 Africans fought for their rights and were brutally massacred by British soldiers. Today in particular, we pay tribute to Kwamina, Jack Gladstone, and Amba, among many other freedom fighters who took part in this rebellion. At least 50 of these heroes had their heads chopped off and placed on stakes from the parade ground to Mahaika. This is just one episode in a 400-year criminal enterprise that the United Nations has described as a crime against humanity. Today, Thursday, October 12th, is the MAAFA, or African Holocaust Day. It is the single most important day in the global African calendar. The MAAFA is commemorated on the 12th of October because it was on this date in 1492 that Christopher Columbus arrived in these parts, and that began the unbridled decimation of indigenous cultures and black African nations. MAAFA means great tragedy. It's also the word that describes the perpetuity of more than 500 years of suffering of people of African descent endured through slavery, imperialism, colonialism, invasions, and exploitation. The current Exxon contract is just a continuation of this MAAFA. It must be nationally recognized and remembered that 473,000 black Africans died during slavery in Guyana. This is hidden from our history books. They laid Guyana's most vital infrastructures with their blood and bones, and we continue to benefit from that. These black Afro-Guyanese died for us, but today we remain disproportionately excluded. So let's talk about one Guyana. Historically, no group in Guyana has done more than black Africans to indigenize Guyana, as depicted in the Vin Commission. We cleared 15,000 square miles. And if you were to add all the lands in Jamaica, Barbados, Trinidad, St. Vincent, it only comes up to 8,000 square miles. But our ancestors cleared 15,000 square miles. Whilst enslaved, our ancestors cleared 9 million hectares of land, moved 100 million acres of ton in their bare arms, and dug 2.58 million miles of drainage canals, trenches, and beds. They also built the seawalls, as well as 3,500 miles of dams, roads, and footpaths. So as we look at it, Africans during 200 years of slavery made Guyana livable out of the wild coast, which was full of venomous snakes and other dangers. I'd like to reiterate that 473,000 enslaved black African lives were lost during 200 years of slavery. This is well documented in the Guyana Reparations story. These lives were brutalized, raped, branded, starved, murdered, maimed, boiled in hot water or tar, and treated as people without souls. All of their human rights, as defined by the United Nations Declaration for Human Rights, were denied, while the Christian church preached peace and obedience to the masters. Slavery is a crime against humanity, and the Guyana Reparations Committee will seek reparations from the Dutch, British, and Guyanese sovereign states.
So be it.
Therefore, ACDA calls for October 12th to be officially recognized as a national holiday and remembered as Remembrance Day of Mass Murder and Enslavement for Black Africans in Guyana.
So be it.
On this poignant note, we need to speak about One Guyana. And in regard to the ongoing disproportionate inequalities of African Guyanese in this particular environment, we have the following recommendations. One Guyana should mean Guyana is a plural democracy in which every Guyanese is equally valued, regardless of race, color, creed, or economic means.
Yeah.
We need a society of genuine ethnic partnerships and intertwined relationships. This means that one Guyana cannot be an ethnic democracy with majoritarian or authoritarian DNA, but it must be a democracy in which all are valued. As a matter of fact, United Nations defined racism and democracy to be incompatible. So in order to have a democracy in Guyana, we cannot have racism as its underlying principle. Indeed, Professor Keane Gibson stated that racism is a political system with a particular power structure, formal and informal rule, socioeconomic privilege, and norms for the differential distribution of material wealth and opportunities. It's also a system of benefits, burdens, rights, and duties. Unfortunately, as people of African descent in Guyana, we feel excluded from these privileges. One Guyana should also be about having a strategic vision of nation building in a rights-based driven democracy, with a shared and common vision of inclusiveness that embodies and incorporates shared values, shared goals, shared responsibilities and accountability, shared governance, shared decision-making, shared transparency, and shared benefits. You'll recognize that the word shared is repeated over and over. If we do have a One Guyana that is like this, we will have a political economy in which everyone benefits and which the aspirational rights of all Guyanese will be met in a fair and just manner. To transform the lives of all Guyanese, One Guyana must be redefined. And it must be redefined in a way in which we see democracy as a human rights marketplace of freedoms, collective ideas, inclusive and transparent institutions, cohesive communities, strong families, and responsible individuals who share a common vision, common values, jointly created and enjoyed by all. So ACDA calls for constitutional reform to ensure Guyana is a truly multi-party, multi-religious, multi-ethnic, and multicultural society. Without constitutional reform, there is no One Guyana. As we think about One Guyana, we must recognize that a government's highest responsibility is the physical, economic, social, cultural, security, and spiritual well-being of all of its citizens. This implies that all citizens of Guyana should have equal access to the natural endowments of the nation and the same equity to develop these endowments. So oil blocks, gold concessions, quarries, contracts, scholarships, commercial lands, and other mineral and financial assets should be equally shared. This does not happen in today's One Guyana. It should also be such that people of African descent should be given preferences before foreign entities and foreign citizens who currently are given preferential rights to these national assets. And this should not happen. One Guyana, in regard to people of black African descent in Guyana, means that Guyana's economic vision and plan must radically address our sustainable development in the context of our climate change realities and strategically diversify our economy to create sustainable wealth in each community. All of our villages along the East Coast that our ancestors bought are at risk by 2030 to climate change. The IPCC projection says that Georgetown and most of these villages will be underwater. Most recently in one Guyana, 200 Amerindian groups were given carbon credits, 20 million each, under the context of low carbon development strategy. Well, low carbon development strategy is about climate change, and it is about the water rising through our villages. So we call on the government to provide carbon credits to our villages along the East Coast so that we can have the same benefit as others in the Guyana community. We call on our politicians who represent African Guyanese to speak to the government about this critical issue, because in 2030, Buxton, Victoria, and all the villages on the East Coast will be under duress. And as you know, plans are being made to make Region 3 the new capital of Guyana. If you were to only walk over to Region 3, you will see the infrastructure that's being built there. You'll see all of the new arrivals from Venezuela are being parked there. Our politicians need to wake up so that we have a one Guyana that is inclusive. Currently, they're sleeping. One Guyana, the people of black African descent, means that our youth should be the essence of a new, inclusive, multiracial, multicultural society. Our youth should be intricately represented in the development process and nurtured through arrangements such as the creation of youth businesses in the black African community, so that food security requirements, which will be discussed next week at the Afro-Caribbean Agricultural Forum, that we will be included. We need to go to these events and not stay away from them because our people are being left out. So I call again on politicians who represent people of African descent to participate fully, not only in the conference that deals with food security, that deals with 20 by 25, that deals with how Guyana will feed the Caribbean. They should be there to represent us because we have hundreds of thousands of acres of land that are underutilized. And so at the heart of this, what I'm saying today, is that one Guyana needs to have a political system where the government and opposition are in constant dialogue so that our needs, our requirements are met, and not have a one Guyana that's defined by one party that excludes us, as is today. I'd like to also pose a question. What is marginalization? Over the last weeks, we've had people in Washington, we've had all sorts of denials about marginalization. But it was Dr. David Hines in 2008 who said, I define marginalization in the following terms: being on the periphery or margins of the political and economic power structures. Does that relate to us? That we are on the periphery of political and economic power? Yes. He also said that marginalization means exercising no direct or indirect influence over normal political and economic decisions. Isn't that true? We have no influence on what's going on with oil. We have no influence what's going on with economics. We have no influence on what's going on with the inflow of foreign nationals in this country. Many of them are going to vote, and yet we have no say in who they are and what rights they have before our rights. So does that mean that we're not marginalized? Because David Hines says marginalization means we have no direct or indirect influence over normal political and economic decisions. For any political leader to say that they will not discuss issues that are relevant to us with the accepted leader of Guyana is an idiot. Because it means that our issues are not being addressed. And we need to have mature political leaders who are going to represent us so that we are not being marginalized. You can't speak about marginalization and not dialogue. Nelson Mandela taught us that. Everyone should understand that no government is going to develop a plan for people of African descent. We have to develop it, and our politicians have to propose that.
Ashe.
David Hines also made many other statements about marginalization. And if you were to map the policies of one Guyana against the definition of marginalization, for example, not having equality of opportunity with other groups in the society, you'll see that we are totally marginalized. And the way to change this marginalization is first to understand the needs of people of African descent, to develop a national development plan for African Guyanese that deals with our issues, with our needs, and we are capable of doing that, and then presenting that to the government of the day. In summary, inclusive nation building, which is what one Guyana is being posed as, is a farce unless we have inclusive dialogue with people of African descent who died to build Guyana.
Ashe.
The oil that's in the ocean, our ancestors' bones are part of that.
Ashe.
And yet we have no oil blocks. And I'd like to add one thing, because we're the only ones that are not aware of this. In 1823, there was an indifference to people of African descent who were living in Guyana by all concerned except the church. In 2023, this same indifference exists. And as Eli Wiesel, the Holocaust survivor, said, and he lost his mother and father in Hitler's evil Nazi German camps, he said this about indifference. Of course, indifference can be tempting. More than that, it can be seductive. It is so much easier to look away from victims. It is, after all, awkward and troublesome to be involved in another person's pain and despair. Yet for this person who is indifferent, his or his neighbor is of no consequence, and therefore their lives are meaningful. As I look around Guyana today, I see a total indifference to people of African descent.
Ashe.
And we're the ones who are enabling that to happen.
Yes.
Because we are voiceless. Because our political leaders are cowards. Because they won't go and represent us. And I don't care who's angry. This is African Holocaust all over again, if we're being left out of this economy. And I end with a statement from Martin Luther King, for those who are listening. Like an unchecked cancer, hate corrodes the personality, it eats away its vital unity. Hate destroys a man's sense of values and his objectivity. It causes him to describe the beautiful as ugly and the ugly as beautiful, and to confuse the true and false with the false and the true. May our politicians wake up from their slumber. May the African community realize that everyone else is indifferent to it. May the African community develop its own African development plan in the context of the overall national development plan of Guyana. And may we understand, as if you look at Israel and Palestine, that foreign nations aren't interested in whose racism is being practiced upon. They have their own interests. So to take a book of 1,400 deaths to the USA is folly. They're not interested. They only have their interests and their rights. And their interest is not about us. So if we're going to speak to the US government and to foreign governments, we have to talk about their rights and how it interfaces with our rights. They know about the racism here. They know about the 1400 deaths. They know the names better than we do. So stop this folly that every time a visitor comes here, you give them a book with 1400 names. They're not interested. We have to recognize that. There's an indifference to us. There's an indifference to us with many prime ministers of the Caribbean. If not, they would have said something.
Engage them differently.
So, on this African Holocaust Day, may the spirits and souls of our ancestors lie in peace at the bottom of the ocean and on this land that they lived, built, and died for. And may we wake up from our slumber. I thank you.
Ashe, Kaede.